Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. Today we are talking about another horror classic that turns 20 years old this year, and that is Saw from 2004. I was able to catch it today in theaters for this 20th anniversary. Now I've been watching and loving horror movies pretty much as long as I can remember. By the time I was like 15, I'd probably seen most of the big classics like The Thing, Alien, Halloween, The Shining, Friday the 13th, A Nightmare on Elm Street, The Exorcist, but for some reason I always avoided this one, at least for a long time. And actually, I shouldn't say for some reason, the reason is very clear, and I think it's the same reason that a lot of people avoid this film. Over the years, Saw has garnered the reputation of being nothing more than gore porn, and as far as the sequels go, I could definitely agree with that statement, but this original has very little gore and torture in it, and it's honestly much more of a psychological horror than anything else. It's very straightforward and contained too. It has one single story with quite a few characters, but for the most part it keeps things simple and to the point, whereas the sequels would go on to introduce tons of characters that not only are in the present storyline but also are proven to have been there the whole time through flashbacks. And it becomes such a convoluted story, which leaves the series feeling more like a string of poorly construed episodes in a show rather than a cohesive film. When Saw was made, they didn't know they were getting a franchise. They didn't know they'd even get one sequel. It was just two indie filmmakers from Australia trying to get their big shot in Hollywood. And this movie is simple in that it starts out with two characters, Adam and Lawrence, waking up in a grungy bathroom chained to metal piping, completely unaware of how they got there, how to get out, and whether they can even trust one another. They also have no idea that they're playing the game of a truly sick serial killer known as Jigsaw. Much like the sequels, this one does jump around in time quite a bit, but in clever ways that reveal layers about the characters that they've already been building up. And it does jump around a lot, so you do kind of have to pay attention to get the full extent of what's going on and not miss little details. I meant to leave a spoiler warning at the beginning of the video, but I forgot to. It's been 20 years since the film came out. I think there's been plenty of time for people to watch it, and if you haven't seen the film, I'd recommend watching it before continuing in this video. But I do like some of these reveals that Adam is actually a private investigator who knew Lawrence before even being placed in this trap. We have the added layer of Lawrence's infidelity, Detective Tapp's breakdown and eventual obsession with solving these crimes, Zepp winding up just being another pawn in Jigsaw's game. All of these work together so cleverly. It's a very fun mystery, especially if you're the kind of person who enjoys trying to solve it as the characters are trying to, because you can almost do that. There are things in the room that you can notice and be like, oh, I wonder if they're going to use that to try to get out of their situation later on, and they probably do. When Lawrence, or Dr. Gordon, starts talking about Jigsaw's history, when he finally figures out who's doing this to them, we get to see some of the more iconic traps in the franchise, such as the reverse bear trap, the barbed wire maze. Is Saw scary? I think so. Maybe not in the same way as something like The Exorcist or the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, but more in line with something like Silence of the Lambs or Seven, both of which I think were clear influences for first-time filmmakers James Wan and Leigh Whannell. The grungy aesthetic and just the greens and brown hues that are used over top of the film feel very Seven to me. There are plenty of really effective set pieces that are they just get under your skin and creep you out. The first time I watched this, I remember being very creeped out by this scene in which Zepp kidnaps Dr. Gordon's family. There's just something about seeing an eyeball in the cracked open closet door that really unsettles me and gets under my skin. There are jump scares too, and I think the one in which Adam uses his camera flash to navigate the darkness of his apartment before he gets jumped by the pig is extremely well done. But I will admit that a large part of what makes Saw so iconic and such a great film and a classic in this genre for me is the twist ending, the reveal that the supposedly dead body that's been laying in the middle of the room this entire time is not dead at all, and it's actually the guy who put them here. John Kramer, despite being, the poster child of this franchise, he has very little screen time in this movie, but he makes a huge impression with it, not only with that twist ending, but just his gravelly voice that you hear as Billy the Puppet is giving the instructions to his victims. And he does have a very distinguishable motive as a serial killer. He seems to genuinely think he's helping people like Amanda overcoming her drug addiction. Of course, his justification claiming that he's not a true murderer and he's just setting up victims to kill themselves. Obviously, that's ludicrous. But you're not supposed to root for John, so I never understand why people find issue with that. Seeing that ending in a theater was an exhilarating experience, especially when you have the surround sound and you get to hear Charlie Clouser's awesome score that just pairs so well with the reveal. Also, I was told that this was the unrated cut that I got to see in theaters. I've never watched the unrated cut before. And to be honest, I didn't really notice many differences. Granted, it's been a while since I've seen the film, but even watching the unrated cut, I don't think there's much gratuitous violence in this at all. I mean, sure, there is some blood and guts shown occasionally, like when Amanda has to gut her cellmate in order to find the key to save herself, but never did it feel as over the top as I had always read it was back before I had ever seen the film. But I won't sit here and say that Saw doesn't have any issues. If I had to pinpoint some of them, Leigh Whannell, as far as being an actor, I don't think he's that great. Some of his line delivery is extremely over the top, and that scene where he has to fake his death just comes off as totally goofy and pulls you out of the suspense. As far as Jigsaw's game goes, a lot of things have to happen a certain way for it to all come together the way it does in the end, so there are definitely some contrivances, some might call them plot holes, but in large, it works for me. The hyper-stylized, sped-up editing is excessive at times, particularly during that chase scene in the third act in which Tap and Zepp are in their cars, but it also gives this series its own identity, and I think it works in ramping up the paranoia and shock of these victims when they wake up in their traps. It has a great backstory too, Leigh Whannell and James Wan being these two indie filmmakers from Australia who find their in with Hollywood through this film, which they made a short first and wrote a whole script and made sure they had the right contacts before actually trying to get the film made. And it was done on such a low budget, I don't know what the exact number is off of the top of my head, but I think they were able to do a lot with that. It's frightening, it's engaging, absolutely exhilarating, and in terms of pacing, this thing never drags. There's always something happening, and at like an hour and 45 minutes, I think it is a very crisp runtime that gets its point across and leaves you with an ending that the first time I saw it, my jaw was on the floor. So I'm gonna give Saw 4.5 stars. This is definitely up there with my favorite horror films of all time. Obviously, I didn't give it a 5 out of 5, so there are definitely others that I would put above it, but it's an awesome film, and I've come to love it over the years. I wish I could say the same for the sequels, most of which range from mediocre to convoluted garbage. But Saw X was pretty good. It was actually probably the best of all the sequels, and we have another one coming out next year, so we'll see. Maybe Saw will find itself in a bit of a resurgence. As always, I encourage you guys to drop down into the comments and let me know what you think of Saw. Hit that like button and subscribe while you're at it if you want to see more videos like this, and I'll catch you in the next one. See you later.
Game over.